This is Madison Lucchese, your SPJ New England correspondent for Student News Live. I am here with Allan Lichtman, a distinguished professor of history at American University. He also established the 13 keys to the White House, which he has used to predict 9 out of the last 10 presidential elections, though he maintains that Al Gore actually won the presidency in 2000. Professor Lichtman, thank you for joining us. How are
My
you today?
pleasure. I'm ready to go.
Awesome. So, can you tell us a little bit about the 13 keys and how they work?
Yeah. The 13 keys don't pay attention to the pundits. I love them, but they have no scientific basis for their opinions about who's going to win or lose elections and no track record. They don't turn on the horse race polls, which are snapshots, but are abused as predictors. Rather, the 13 keys reflect how American presidential elections really work as votes up or down on the strength and performance of the White House party. Imagine that. The big message is it's governing, not campaigning, that counts. And the way it works, they're all equally weighted as true-false questions. If 6 or more of the 13 keys are false, the White House party is a predicted loser. Fewer than 6 keys, the White House party is a predicted winner. And here quickly are the keys: mandate based on US House elections, incumbency, contests for the White House party, third party, short and long-term economy, policy change, social unrest, scandal, foreign/military failures and successes. And only 2 keys have anything to do with the candidates, and they're really high threshold keys. They ask if the incumbent or challenging candidate are one of those once in a generation, across the board, inspirational candidates like Franklin Roosevelt, the Democrat, or Ronald Reagan, the Republican.
That is awesome. That all of that information. And I like that there's only 2 keys that are about the candidate themselves because really so much more goes into the presidential election than just the candidates themselves.
That's right. And often I'm able to predict elections. Sometimes the keys fall into place before I even know who the candidates are. For example, I predicted in 2006 that the incumbent Republicans would lose the presidency in 2008. And of course, we had no idea who the candidates were going to be, but I said things were going so badly on the other keys for the Republicans that the Democrats could pick a name out of the phone book and elect that person president. And of course, that's what they did. Who had ever heard of Barack Obama, a state senator from Illinois?
Wow. That is crazy. I had no idea. Obviously, when it was 2006, I was very young, but that's amazing that you just be able to figure that out without even knowing the candidates.
Correct.
So a little bit
Most
more
of the
about,
keys have nothing to do with the candidates.
yeah. So a little bit more about the keys. How did you come up with them?
I'd love to tell you, students, I came up with them by ruining my eyes in the archives, by deep and long contemplation. But if I were to tell you that, to quote the late, not so great Richard Nixon, that would be wrong. There was a lot of serendipity involved here. In 1981, I was a distinguished visiting scholar at Caltech in Southern California. And there I met the world's leading authority on earthquake prediction, Vladimir Kyla-Sporok from Moscow. And he said, we're going to collaborate. And being brilliant and foresightful, I said, no, we're not. Earthquakes may be a big deal here in Southern California at Caltech. I got to go back to American University in DC. Nobody cares about earthquakes there. And he said, oh, no, I already solved earthquakes. Right. He said, get this. In 1963, he was a member of the Soviet scientific delegation that came to DC and negotiated the most important treaty in the history of the world. It's the treaty why you young people are still here, the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty that stopped us from poisoning our atmosphere, our oceans, and our soil. And he said in DC, I fell in love with politics and always wanted to use the methods of earthquake prediction, of pattern recognition, to predict elections. But I live in the Soviet Union. Elections, forget it. It's supreme leader or off with your head. But you, me, you're an expert in the presidency, American politics and history. and we thus became the odd couple of political research. Remember, this is 81, so we looked retrospectively at every election, from the election of Lincoln in the horse and buggy days of politics in 1860 to the election of Reagan in 1980. And we used Kyla Sporok's method of pattern recognition to discern what patterns could separate out in geophysical terms: stability, the White House party keeps power; earthquake, they're turned out of power. And that research produced the 13 keys and the 6 keys and you're out decision rule.
Wow. The fact that it came from a model for earthquakes is insane. It's wild. But I also think it's interesting that you started with the Lincoln presidency, the Lincoln election. Is there a reason why you didn't start with the presidencies before that?
Well, the reason we started that was it gave us plenty of time, 120 years. Plus, that was the first year of the contemporary two-party system of Republicans versus Democrats. And you got to start somewhere, and that's a good starting point. Plus, the farther back you go, the more dubious the statistics, and even earlier, the whole system was different.
It definitely was totally different. I just was curious if there was any other reason why, but that's very interesting. So you've correctly predicted 9 out of the last 10 elections since 1984, though you maintain you should be 10 for 10. What happened in the election that got away?
I know because I did the report on the election for the United States Commission on Civil Rights. And my report, still on their website, you can look it up, proved that based on the intent of voters, Al Gore should have won Florida going away in the presidency. Because I proved that 1 out of 9 to 10 votes cast by a 95% Democratic African American were tossed out by Florida officials. These weren't African Americans who were prevented from voting. If you had lined up 9 or 10 African Americans who thought they voted, you would have pulled out one and say, sorry, your vote doesn't count. That compared to 1 out of 50 votes tossed out for predominantly Republican whites. Moreover, most of the discarded disproportional African American votes were not those hanging chads or dimples, but overvotes. For good reason, African Americans didn't trust the system. After all, the governor was the brother of the Republican candidate. So on those crazy punch cards, they punched in Gore, and then, to be sure, wrote in Gore, and all those ballots were discarded. My point from the Civil Rights Commission report was independently validated by one of the nation's leading political scientists in a study I had nothing to do with, by Professor Walter Mebane of Cornell University, and his study was entitled "The Wrong Man is President!" But historians will argue about 2000 forever.
I agree. We've been talking about the election of 2000 here at Emerson College in the newsroom, and where things have gone wrong and all of those types of things, to see if we can predict what's going to happen in this year's election. But we're no experts the way that you are. Speaking of predictions, you were originally predicting that Joe Biden was going to win the election, even after.
No, I need to correct you there.
Yes.
I never said Joe Biden was going to win. I didn't issue a prediction until September 5th, when Harris was what I said was, I was very critical of the Democrats for openly trashing and viciously their sitting president out in public. I've never seen that before. And I thought they were headed for disaster, that they would push Biden out and lose my incumbency key, and have a big party brawl and lose the contest key. No White House party has ever won re-election since 1900 when losing both those keys. But I never predicted that Biden would win the election. I made no final prediction until September 5th. Who knows what would have happened if Biden stayed in? Impossible to tell.
Okay, well, thank you for correcting me. So why are you now predicting that Harris will win?
Yeah, remember, it takes 6 keys to count out Harris and the incumbent Democrats, and they're only down 4. Mandate key, because the Democrats lost U.S. House elections in 2022. Incumbency, obviously, because Biden's out. Foreign policy failure. The Middle East is a disaster, a humanitarian catastrophe with no good end in sight.
Hmm.
and incumbent charisma. Whatever you may think of Harris, she's only been a candidate for a little while. She certainly hasn't reached the status of an FDR. That's only four. Take 6 keys to predict Donald Trump would come back to the White House and Harris would lose. That's why I'm predicting America will have its first woman president, at least cracking, if not shattering, the glass ceiling, and our first president of mixed African and Asian descent, kind of foreshadowing where the US is going. We're rapidly becoming a majority minority country. Old white guys like me are on the way out.
Hmm. Definitely, times are changing, and I do think myself that Harris is charismatic, but I see definitely not the way that past presidents have been or candidates like that. That's
Right, you
awesome.
have to stick to how the keys are defined, not what you might think. You know, a lot of people think Trump is charismatic, but he only appeals to a narrow base, doesn't fit the
Absolutely.
definition. You know, in 4 years as president, his approval rating on average in the Gallup poll was 41%, the narrow base, putting him right at the bottom of presidents. So I got
Absolutely.
to go soon, so we need to wrap up soon.
Absolutely. So, what do you think would have to go wrong for Harris to lose?
I can't see anything in a week. You know, the biggest myth in American politics is the October surprise. I've always made my predictions before then and never changed them. Biggest October surprise we had was in 2016 when the Access Hollywood tape came out showing Trump bragging about sexually assaulting women, and lots of women came out and said, yeah, that's exactly what he did to me. Even Republicans thought he was finished. But I stuck to my prediction of a Trump win, which did not make me very popular in 90%
Hmm.
Democratic Washington, D.C., where I teach at American University. But if I'd listened to the critics, I never do, I would have been wrong.
Absolutely. Sometimes having a popular opinion just isn't needed. Well, we will soon see if your nearly unbroken streak will continue. Professor Lichtman, thank you for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you. You know, I'm 77 and I still get butterflies in my stomach every 4 years because I can be proven right or wrong. I tell you who's going to win, not like the pundits and the pollsters who give you these meaningless probabilities, which could be right, could be wrong, who knows. All right, take care.
Bye. Have a good
Bye.
day.